Niriana, are you okay there?
Yeah, David. So I guess we have to start now, right?
So we just get started?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Did you just want to...
Hello,
Yeah,
everyone.
go for it.
Hello, everyone. Very cheerful evening and morning to you. Once again, I welcome you all on this platform, Ki Pathshala, and in this last day of webinar series, Freedom from Social Stigma of Mental Health. Ki Pathshala is an online platform which provides an opportunity to users for their overall development rather than just academics. We ensure this by offering a wide platform including extracurriculars as well as mental health support to the users by offering them psychological help. Now it's time to introduce the speaker of Day 3, Session 1. So I heartily welcome Mr. David Klassen for joining us, who is going to provide his expert advice on this important issue of how to alleviate mental stigma via behavior change. David is one of the founding directors of Talent for Performance, a specialist strategic organizational development practice. Their formula for success is clarity cross people is equals to performance. Everything he does is underpinned by the latest thinking in the field of applied neuroscience. His approach can often release unexpected resources and innovation amongst management and staff. David brings over 30 years experience of developing leaders and management teams to his clients. His strategic approach to leadership, management, and team development, and his pragmatic approach to HR issues earned him recognition as a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development in 2002. He is also a member of the Institute of Directors. Moving towards our topic, stigma. Stigma is a collection of negative attitudes, beliefs, thoughts, and behaviors that influence the individual or the general public to fear, reject, avoid, be prejudiced, and discriminate people. Stigma is a serious problem and barrier for achieving life goals in those with mental illness. Stigma impedes mental health through underutilization of mental health services. Stigma basically consists of three problems: the problem of knowledge, that is ignorance, the problem of attitudes, that is prejudice, and the problem of behavior, that is discrimination. At a time when there is an unprecedented volume of information in the public domain, the level of accurate knowledge about mental illnesses are very mediocre. Fear, anxiety, and avoidance are common feelings for both people who do not have mental illness and for people with mental illness who anticipate rejection and discrimination and therefore impose upon themselves a form of self-stigma. Actions are needed to specifically redress the issue of the stigma. So, I am inviting Mr. David Klassen to present his view on this important issue. Welcome, David.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for that lovely introduction. I'm really delighted to be here with you all. And I'd like to start off, as I start off most of my webinars, I'd just like to start by asking you all a question, all the listeners, all 40 of you. And that question is, could you just put into the chat one word that best describes how you feel? I'd really like to just hear, how do you feel? Well, just one word, pop it into the chat, and it'd be interesting to see what sort of words come up. If you just do that now. For example, I'm feeling excited about this webinar and to speaking to you all. Jolly and enthusiastic, lovely, happy, good, thank you. Excited, oh, guilty, okay. Wonderful, happy, a bit sad. Okay. And, it's not unusual for me to see this broad range of feelings. Some people excited, some people happy, but, some people are feeling a bit sad or not so sure. Okay. Because, one of the things that we're noticing, especially at the moment, and I'm going to even show a slide about this, is that our feelings are all over the place. It's really difficult to know necessarily how someone else is feeling, but also how you'll be feeling, because you might be feeling fine now, but maybe later in the day you'll hear something, or you hear about a friend or a family member that something has happened to, and that can be then a real charge on your emotions. Great. So thanks very much for that. And I appreciate you all just saying something and being honest about how you're feeling, because part of what we're going to be talking today is about you at least being honest with yourself about how you're feeling. So when I was starting on the research for this webinar, because we've spoken about it a number of times, I wanted to just look, and I noticed some rather shocking statistics. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health problem of some kind each year in India. That's a lot of people, right? 20%. If you think about that, 1.2 billion people, 1 in 5, that's a lot of people. And the World Health Organization also predicted that by 2020, which we're in now, roughly 20% of India will suffer from mental health illnesses. So that again confirms the same statistic. But here's the shocking thing. This research, which is actually from the Economic Times, that's where I got it from. You can see the reference down below. The source of the Economic Times, but there are less than 4,000 registered experts. So, what was being said earlier about Ki Pathshala being able to be there as a support is absolutely important for you to be able to take on board and use as a resource, because there's very little resources available. So it's really fantastic that they're doing this great work to help people. So I also thought this was interesting. I just saw this morning actually on LinkedIn, so I cut and pasted it and put it into the slide. But these are the classic stages of grief that you can see, from loss, hurt, shock, numbness, denial. It's a classic curve that we often see. All through the loneliness and then depression, but then re-entry, new relationships, new strengths, new patterns, hope, affirmation, and helping others, to loss adjustment. But actually what this was saying was that actually now we're in a very different situation. Now it looks a bit more like this. The 2020 experience with the pandemic and all the volatility is meaning that you never quite know where you're feeling or where others are feeling. So it's about being kind and gentle with yourself and those you love, because you never quite know where they're going to be on this, what would normally be a curve of progression in one direction, down and then back up again. This is now all over the place. So I also wanted to just talk through what I'm going to talk through today. So first, introductions, a bit about mental well-being, a little bit about brain science, and then a bit about mental health awareness and levels of empathy. And also, I think it's important to be on stress awareness. And then the mindsets, habits, and behaviors. And if we have time, we'll do a little bit of stuff around the paradoxes of mental well-being with some Q&A as we go. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Dublin. That's Dublin, Ireland, just off the coast of England, which is off the coast of Europe. And that's my mum and dad. I'm going to speak about my dad in a minute. He was a graphic designer in Ireland, although he was Dutch. So both my parents were Dutch. And that's him I think he's around 60 there. And he died sadly at 63. But I'll tell you something about happened to him when he was still quite young. And that's me when I was working as a chef in the kitchens in the hotel, the Connaught Hotel in London. And that was a very, very intense environment, brutally intense, in fact. And I really needed to keep my wits about me and manage my stress and learn how to manage stress there, because it was so tough working as a chef in that busy kitchen. And then I moved out of kitchens after 10 years. I got into training and development, which was a whole new career. And I started that in 1988. And then worked with loads of different businesses in London and became a fellow, as was mentioned earlier, at the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, because I work not only in learning and development, but also in strategic HR at a strategic level with the organizations I work with. And I set up my first business in 2004. But then in 2014-15, teamed up with my current business partner, Ali Gibbons, and we put together Talent for Performance, which is the company that was mentioned earlier. And we're now working with some fantastic clients like UK Parliament, the Shangri-La Resort Group, and a number of other global organizations to help them understand their mindsets, habits, and behaviors to improve performance. So if we talk about well-being, what do we really mean by that? So again, I did a bit of research and I looked into what different people say about it. And mental well-being and emotional well-being are commonly used to describe the same thing. For example, a state in which an individual is comfortable within themselves, healthy or happy, but may include some broader concepts such as life satisfaction, a person's sense of individual purpose, and how much in control they feel. Excuse me. But the British Medical Journal put it this way: being confident and positive and being able to cope with the ups and downs of life. And again, that's a good distinction. And then the World Health Organization looks at it as a state in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities. And that's an important part of all of this, is to be able to recognize your own strengths, can cope with normal stresses of life and work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So we're going to be looking at what is it that's needed by you and the people you know in order to support people to have their better well-being. And what do you need to be sensitive to in order to be able to do that? So again, quick question just in the chat, because, you know, I like to have a little bit of hearing where you're coming from. What is your main challenge or concern with regard to mental well-being or the stigma of mental illness? Just put your answers into the chat and we'll have a look at a few, just so that I'm a little bit able to understand some of the challenges that you find with regards to or concerning mental well-being, or as the topic of this webinar is about, the stigma. Negative narratives towards stigma, okay. Breathlessness and anxious, okay. People judgmental and lacking awareness, okay. I'm just going to make some notes. Lack of awareness. Handling emotions, okay. And overcoming negative thoughts, yeah. Uncertainty. Stress and anxiety. Negative thoughts about life. Stress and pressure, handling problems, okay, yeah. Dealing with people having anger issues. Good. Anxiety. Right. So there's a general trend there. I see that. And that's good, because I'm going to be looking at a number of those things as we go through this session. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you just sharing that with me. And I know sometimes it takes courage to be able to share that sort of stuff and go, like, you know, sometimes it's not perfect. Sometimes life's not okay. So I want to just talk a little bit very quickly about a bit of the brain science, because I found that as I studied brain science, I became much more compassionate about myself. Because you see, the thing is, we all have this thing, our brain. And it's a fascinating thing that we are only now beginning to discover things like. It's seen as the newest frontier of discovery for mankind, for people, for scientists. Because now in the last, let's say now, I say in the last 20 years, it's the first time ever in the history of mankind or humankind that we've been able to measure what's going on in someone's brain while they're still alive, you know, while they're still thinking. So we now have sensitive equipment. We'll be able to say, okay, let's do some experiments, make this person think this, make them think that, and then notice which regions of the brain are activated and what happens within the brain. And then what can we do about that? What can we do to help people? But one of the things that I'd like to mention is that in the brain, there are about 86 billion cells, 86 billion individual neurons. Now, the thing about an individual neuron is that it actually is connected to between, well, sometimes 10, 15, but it can be connected to up to 15,000 other neurons. So if you think about that, 86 billion, and multiply that with 15,000, so add all those zeros, do a multiplier, and you get a very big number. In fact, the number is so big that scientists can't really imagine it. And some people have said that it's actually the same as the number of connections in your brain is the same as the number of known stars in the universe. So that's a pretty big number. But some people have even got, no, that's too small. It's the number of individual atoms in the universe. So whatever it is, it's a huge number. Now, the interesting thing about it, right, is that your brain is wired in a particular way. We are all humans, and this is where we're unique to other creatures on the planet. We're born about 2, maybe 3 years premature. We cannot walk, we cannot, do anything. We can't barely eat, we can barely do anything at all. We are completely helpless, pretty much for the first 1.5 to 2 years. So actually, but that is a very key development issue, because it means that we need to be looked after, or we'll die, but also then our brain can adapt to the environment that it's in. So humans are brilliant at adapting to their environment. We are profoundly able to adapt to heat, to cold, to high, to low, all over the planet. If you think about it, humans have populated the planet like no other creature. But it's all driven by two things. It's driven by what gives you pleasure and what gives you pain. That's what wires your brain, essentially, right? There's lots of other things, of course, but the main things are you're going to do more of the things that bring pleasure and help you feel good and feel comfortable and at peace. And you're going to avoid the things that make you feel bad. And that programming has helped humans to survive for so long. And for your gene pool, within your family tree and your ancestry, to be able to survive to where it is. And there's a couple of things worth noting. That the brain, if you see that this is roughly the brain, this is where the eyes would be here at the front, if you can see my cursor moving. And you've got the whole brain, and this is the brain stem. So this is the early part of our brain, which we share with all other creatures. And then we've got this sort of cingulate cortex area, which we share with all the other mammals. And here we've got two interesting things. 3 actually that I want to mention. One is the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex in humans is more developed than any other creature on the planet, and that's where we do all our thinking, and I'm going to come back to it in a moment. But it's driven often by these two things, this little one here and this little one here. As you can see, this one's red, and it's called the amygdala, and I just want to mention that because it's the storage place for all your memories. And notice, not all your memories, but a number of memories, specific memories to do with something that's caused pain, right? Something that caused you upset or caused you stress. That's where it's stored. And it's very, very reactive. It's very, very sensitive. And then you've also got this one over here, which is the ventral striatum, which is what we call your reward center, which motivates you towards something and to do something to get something, goals or more pleasure. So there's away from fear and pain and discomfort and towards pleasure. But notice that the amygdala is quite close to this brainstem. So it's super reactive. And for these to be reacting, you're not necessarily using your prefrontal cortex. So let's have a look at that. The prefrontal cortex is the main part where we do our thinking. And what I mean by that, I mean emotional regulation, including understanding, memorizing, remembering, decision-making, and inhibition. So you need to have all of your resources available to you to be able to use your prefrontal cortex in order to manage your emotions, to regulate your emotions. If you get exhausted or tired, or if your energy depletes, that can become more difficult. And this is what's really interesting. The prefrontal cortex, that bit at the front of our brain, is it's only about 4% of our brain mass, but it uses about 80% of the brain's energy. So if we have energy, it gets depleted the more we use it and try and memorize and remember. And also, in fact, with inhibition, will use up a lot of energy. And you might notice that in the evening after a busy day, you're a bit tired. You might go, oh, there's a lovely chapati, or there's a lovely biscuit or sweet meat that you want to eat because you go like, I've had a difficult day. But your ability to resist that drops a lot. So you can't inhibit those feelings that you want, I want something sweet. Now, the ventral striatum then can kick in because it's something that you want as a reward, a dopamine reward system. And that can replenish the energy in your brain a bit. But you have to be careful with it because you can't just rely on that all the time. And then the amygdala can kick in whenever there's a threat response, right? Whenever we have any of those thoughts that might be a bit negative or might be a little bit difficult, that can quickly deplete our energy again. So you can see that the brain is constantly trying to manage energy, and it's constantly having this battery charge and then deplete and then recharge and deplete. And sleep and exercise and healthy food are all helpful ways to help you be able to get that energy right, because it's when our energy gets depleted that a lot of the mental anxieties become difficult to manage, or at least more difficult to manage. Because the thing is that, again, this is evolutionary. Our brain is designed to make bad things, threats, 5 times stronger than rewards. So that's what the research shows, that we're 5 times more sensitive to a threat than we are to a reward. So whenever there is a threat, we have to be really focused and conscious of what we're doing with our brain in order to be able to alleviate that. So again, that's really important just to be aware of. And the final thing I wanted to mention in this section was that we can easily be sparked into a threat response. And that's what we call an amygdala hijack. Remember that point I said earlier about the amygdala, which is the small part of the brain where a lot of emotional memories are stored. And they're not consciously stored there. They're very much below our conscious awareness. But when we have an amygdala hijack and we get that threat response, we actually have a very narrow focus. So we get tunnel vision. We don't see the big picture. We get defensive. We feel everyone's attacking us and we have to protect ourselves. We make accidental connections in our brain where we begin to go, oh my goodness, this thought happened and this thought happened. Like I'm doing this webinar and I can't see anybody. Maybe everyone's leaving. Oh, I'm seeing some people now just left the meeting. Maybe I'm being really boring. And before I know it, I can go into a tizzy and then I lose the plot and I feel I get really upset, right? But thankfully, I've had a bit of practice with webinars, so that hasn't happened. And I don't make those accidental connections. And what's also true is that those accidental connections are made with a pessimistic bias. So you'll automatically, if something happens, you automatically think it's for a bad reason. You create a bad reason just because you got an amygdala hijack. And you got less cognitive resource. So you're less able to access your prefrontal cortex. So that was just a little summary of some of the brain science that I wanted to mention as a bit of a background to this, because it's important when we talk about other people having fear of mental illness and stigma around mental illness. It's actually because they're actually quite scared of it themselves. And we haven't really talked about that much. So does anybody have any questions on what I've covered so far? Quick question, just one or two. Anything that I've covered so far about the prefrontal cortex and a little bit about the brain? What happens when we get stressed? What happens in our brain? If there are no questions, that's fine. No, okay, so I'm not getting on any questions at the moment. Let me know if anyone else gives any questions. Everything is well explained. Thank you. That's sweet. Okay. So you know what, you can always ask questions as we go through this as well, because we'll see them in the chat and then I'll be able to pause and answer questions as they go through. So the next one, let's talk about mental health awareness. So, you know, there is, as we said earlier, how does the hippocampus get affected due to this? Okay, well, the hippocampus is actually where it's like the switchboard. If you imagine the old-fashioned telephone switchboards, it's where you plug memories and put them through, and that will also get less effective if you get stressed. It becomes less effective. So let's have a look at the challenges of talking about mental health, because that's what really we are talking about here today. We're talking about, you know, a number of the things that were mentioned earlier, like ignorance. Now, ignorance is that lack of knowledge. People can't see it. You know, if you break your arm or you have a cold, you know, people will know that you have this ailment. They will be able to see that you're unwell. But with mental illness, it's not that easy to see. In fact, it's really difficult to see unless you know what you're looking for. They don't understand it. So there's a lot of fear around it. And remember, we said a threat response is 5 times greater than a reward response. So people have a lot of fear, and that's what's preventing them from looking into and you know, having that conversation. And, you know, if I can't see it and I don't understand it, it must be made up. It's just in your head. And, you know, it's not that long ago that the medical profession were like that a lot. And, you know, even medical doctors who'd been through all their medical training still didn't understand the mind and how it works. So what is the role of dopamine? I see that's a good question. I'm going to talk about that later because I'm really glad you mentioned it. It's about that the role of dopamine is that it helps us have a desire for something that feels good. It's a feel-good chemical or hormone in our brain, neurochemical in our brain. And when we're motivated and curious, we get dopamine, and that makes us want to find out more. And I want you to think about that whenever you have a colleague or a friend or a fellow student who's maybe changing their behavior a bit, or they're acting out of character, that you become curious, because that will also allow some dopamine to be triggered in your mind rather than fear, so that you don't have an amygdala response. Oh my God, my friend, there's something wrong with my friend. It's like, oh, what's curious about this? I want to find out more. Is there something I can do to help? That's how dopamine can really help with that. I can take care of our amygdala. Yes, I will do that. I'll do that in due course. So stigma, we can't discuss it. Fear of judgment. I might be judged. So there's a stigma where we cannot discuss this because it's taboo in some way. And yet we need to find a language for discussing our feelings. And we need to find a language, not necessarily to say I've got a mental illness, but to say I'm troubled by something. I'm troubled by some thoughts that I'm having. Like I asked you, a number of you, how are you feeling, or what's your greatest challenge? And a number of you were honest and said, okay, there's anxiety about this. And if we can label our feelings, we can really begin to transform the way that we talk about mental health. And then finally, discrimination, which really is about, it's seen as a weakness. And this is the danger, the biggest danger I find about discrimination, as all the things that were mentioned earlier as well in the introduction, is that it actually produces a lack of empathy, which means we don't care so much about the feelings of that other person. So I'd really like you to be able to turn all those things on our head, especially, I know that a number of people on this call are studying psychology, so that you have a duty and a responsibility to your fellow people, your fellow citizens, the people you interact with, your communities, to understand that it is difficult to see, and that, it's not just made up, that if someone is feeling those feelings, then they're feeling those feelings. And find a way, a vocabulary to discuss it, so that we don't have this fear of judgment. We have this way of understanding with compassion. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So, that's my father. With my mother back in that would be the mid-60s, because that's me, the little boy in the middle. And what I like about this picture is the look on my face as I look at my father, and the love that I have for him, and he was just my hero back in those days. And it was really, he's still a great guy, although he died back in 1989. But this was shortly after, I believe, if I get my time right, shortly after he had mental illness. He was actually clinically depressed. He found it it was very, very stressful. He was going through a lot of stress in his life in Ireland back in the early 60s. And it all became too much. And he just said, I can't really cope. And it was great, because we were able to get people who understood that this was something that we could clinically say, right? So you've got depression, and that there's something you can do about it. And that so in my family, we've always been able to go, well, if my dad had something like that, and he's a great guy and he recovered and it's all fine. We've always had a very open-mindedness, I think, in my family to that. And even to the degree that when I was going to become a chef, my godmother, a very wise spiritual lady, gave me some great books to read, but she also said, you need to learn how to meditate. So at the age of 16, I learned how to meditate, which is one of the most powerful ways to be able to calm your mind down, so you become more sensitive to any triggers, any feelings of stress, and be able to watch your thinking so that you can begin to think about something else. It's a way of being able to influence your thinking, but only from a place of peace. Because one of the things my father said, I always used to ask him, what's most important to you in life? When you're a teenager, you ask that sort of question, right? So when I was 13, 14, maybe 16, what's the meaning of life? What's most important in life? And he always said this. He said, it's about peace of mind. And when we have peace of mind, it's a little bit like at the moment, if you're just sitting there in your chair listening to me, and you just feel through your body, if you're free of pain, you don't really notice and go, oh, exquisite, I've got no pain. But if you're in pain, you really notice it, and you long for not having pain. And mental illness is a bit like that as well, that we don't really notice it until we have it. That feeling of anxiety, that feeling of upset. So it's really important to be conscious of when you're feeling good and when you're feeling no pain, so that you can calibrate and go, actually, you know what? I'm not feeling comfortable at the moment. I'm feeling a bit of stress, or I'm feeling some anxiety. Because the earlier you can catch it, and the earlier you can spot it in a colleague or a friend or a fellow student, the easier it is to deal with. Because another example that I wanted to mention was that, in the UK, I don't know if anybody knows who these guys are. Can anybody tell me? Can you just quickly put into the chat? Do you recognize either of these chaps? Yes? Okay. Go on. Who are they then? They're quite famous over here. I don't know if they're so famous in India. Prince of Britain. Yeah, Princes of Britain. Right. So there's William on the left and Harry on the right. Now, Harry can be a bit of a rebel because he's never going to be king, or very rarely. But this guy, William, is in line for the throne, so he has to behave himself. But it was really interesting. They're very, very, that's right, Prince Harry and William. They're very, very respected in the UK because, in the UK, everyone loves the royal family. Well, most people love the royal family. And the royal family are also seen as being very proper, very prim, very, these are the rules, etiquette, royalty, aristocracy, and all that sort of stuff. And yet these two young men were able to go on TV in the last couple of years and go, I had a mental health issue. And that was a big shock for most people in the UK to go, oh my goodness, they're talking about mental health. And it's done a world of good. So people are more able to talk about it now. And that there's, the charities are being able to go, great, we're getting people calling us now. We're having people speak about this. We're allowed to speak about it. So I think they've done a huge service to humanity by being able to talk about their own pain, their own grief, especially when their mother died and the way she died and all the press around it, that actually they had to suppress a lot of their feelings. And that didn't do them any good when they were growing up. So only, many, many, many years later, after lots and lots of therapy, were they able to actually, resolve some quite difficult issues within themselves. And they were willing to speak about that. So Harry, for example, is a patron, I think still, of a charity called Mind, which is a specialist charity for mental health issues. So I just wanted to mention how a big difference can happen when someone famous talks about it. And again, I don't know if maybe some great Bollywood actor or actresses were able to talk about it. That would also help remove some of this stigma. So, okay, I want to go into this next bit quite quickly, and that's the 3 levels of empathy. So it's important to recognize that there are these 3 levels. And the first one is what I call affective arousal. You're aroused. You go like, you get a feeling of, oh my goodness, there's something happening to that human being over there. We can recognize something is happening. But it's a quick reaction and it's a fight or flight response. So it's not necessarily thought through. It's like you experience the similar feelings to the person you're observing. And it's not always correct because it's your interpretation of what you're seeing and feeling. But then you get Empaths Concern. And that's the next level. And this is interesting because this is about social attachment, someone you care about or someone you love. And it's actually about also parental care in mammals. And this is what something interesting happens here, that it triggers oxytocin, where we actually have a deep love and care for someone, a child that's needing help or love or support. And it motivates us to want to help that person. And then you have this final level, which is the level I'm going to ask you to exercise, especially with colleagues, friends, or family, siblings, especially this month. I believe this is a very special month for siblings in India. And I want to talk about my siblings as well, because my siblings, we meet every Saturday and speak on Skype, which is wonderful. But empathic understanding, and that's about reflective awareness of one's own and of others' emotions. And the thing is, it's a reflective awareness. It's not a reactive situation. You're able to reflect, use your prefrontal cortex and go, okay, what do I need to do to help this person here? How can I better understand this person here? Rather than finding someone who's in a pit and go, oh my God, they're in a pit. What can I do? And jump into the pit with them and go, oh yeah, this is really bad. It's better to be able to go, okay, I see you're in a pit. That must be really uncomfortable. You calm down because I'm up here and I'm going to help you out. I'm going to figure out a way to get you out of that pit, rather than jumping into the pit with them and going like, oh, it's all really bad. So, one of the things about mental awareness that I really want you to be clear about is show you care. And you show you care by being open, and this is the key thing, curious. Again, that triggers some dopamine for you so that it actually feels good to be curious. It feels like, I wonder what's going to happen next. And create rapport and connection. So you need to avoid judgment or generalizing their behaviors. And you do that by listening. What are they saying? And what are they not saying? What do you notice about their behavior? And do you notice anything about their behavior that's slightly different? That's different to normal? Are they out of character in some way? Pay attention, because you are needing to do that and listen to what's being said, how they're behaving, and how what you notice about it. So, and this is the next one is be present with them. Just allow yourself to have no other thoughts in your mind about, but be there for them as a friend, as a colleague, as a fellow student. And what I like about being present is that it's like a little gift for them. It means that you're there and you're listening for them, because sometimes when someone has a little bit of a anxiety or is not feeling comfortable in the world, just being able to speak to another human being is really powerful. And you can do that for someone. And that's one of the things I want you to sort of step into, is to remove and alleviate this stigma and be able to talk to someone. And don't go, oh, you've got a mental health issue. It's just like no judgment. It's like, okay, you want to talk? Just talk. And you don't necessarily have to do anything, but listen. And then notice any differences. Notice the differences in maybe their anxiety levels. And then if you can be empathic and listen to them without judgment, because that's really, really important, that notice how they may calm down a little. They may begin to feel a little bit more relaxed. And they may even talk about feeling a little bit more relaxed because of their ability to speak with you. So also recognize that we have different identities and contexts. So I can be a father or a son or a carer or a friend, or you may be a mother or a daughter, friend, teacher, or student. And it's important to say, in what context of this person's life may this stress be occurring in? Is it because they've got exams coming up? Is it because they've got a child who's got exams coming up? It could be anything, right? And you don't know. And the only way to find out is to ask some gentle, non-judgmental questions. So I'd really like you to explore that, because that in itself helps you alleviate the stigma of mental illness. And the more you can do it, the more you can talk to others about it, and there you can spread that. So if you can talk to 5 people about this and share this material, you can really help them as well. And if they can help another 5 people, then you're making a big difference in your community. So back to stress, it's really important to recognize that we all have different levels of stress and different responses to stress. And I like this. This is from actually 1908. And it's about performance and pressure. And if you look, what Yerkes and Dodson did in their studies was they said there's actually what they call the inverted U of performance. And it goes like this. So it's an upside down U. And if you look, then you can see that performance will, if you don't have any pressure, nothing's happening, you don't have a job, you're just listless, that can actually reduce performance. And in fact, it can even cause depression, because, you know, the people in the UK who've been furloughed at the moment, that means they're getting paid, but they don't have work and they might be losing their job, are under a lot of pressure because, you know, well, they don't have the pressure of work, but then they make up a whole bunch of other stuff in their minds and their performance actually drops. So it's about finding that ideal point of pressure where you're at your top performance, peak performance, and noticing that and what I call the sweet spot. Because the thing is, the sweet spot for you might be very different to the sweet spot for someone else. Because right here is the center of the sweet spot for this person. But it might be that someone over here with only just a little bit of pressure, less pressure than you can handle, that might be their sweet spot. And once they go to your level of pressure, they're on this downward spiral, where if we actually get to this situation, it's really important to be able to say, what support do you need? It's tolerable. That level of stress is tolerable, but with support. So you really need to be supportive, and you need to be able to be big and bold enough to ask for support. And, you know, again, Ki Pathshala are there in order to help you with that. That's the key driver, why I wanted to help and do this webinar, because I wanted you to be able to know that they are there for you. Because the next bit is much more difficult to deal with. That's when things get toxic. That's when people get ill. That's when things get difficult to manage. So I'd like you to be aware of that and notice that it's the earlier you can do something about stress, the more easy it is to do something about it, and the more support is available. Because then once it gets toxic, that gets difficult. But we all have this stress bucket, right? And it fills up with life. You know, we all have a stress bucket. It's very normal to be human. And it's a nice way of having a metaphor for saying, this is the bucket that holds all my stress. And life fills it up, right? So we have different sizes of stress bucket. And some people have a very big stress bucket. I grew and developed quite a big stress bucket because of my life as a chef. And also my ability to meditate every day means that I can tolerate quite a lot of stress. And then also be aware that if we don't release any of that stress, or if our bucket isn't very big, it can overflow. And that's when things get messy, right? That's when the stress overflows into our lives and we're not able to cope because it's actually quite overwhelming. And the key is, where is the little tap in the bucket so that you can release some of the stress before it gets to overflowing? So what I'd like you to think about is, be aware of your stress bucket, be aware of the stress bucket of others, and say, okay, what's the little tap and how can you help them find a tap? Because the key is to find it. And when you're very stressed, it's difficult to find the tap. That you can release some of that stress by talking to people, by listening in a non-judgmental way. So I've gone through all of those. That style went like that. So yeah, I'd like to also mention this. This is a really profound bit that when I learned about it, I was quite surprised at the difference it can make. When we have an amygdala hijack, some people asked about, okay, what do we do to calm our amygdala down, right? So that was one of the questions earlier. And the important thing is to be able to label your feelings. So I really like this, and we can share this with you later as well. This is what's called an emotional vocabulary chart. And the goal is to be able to catch your feeling. So you notice, oh, I'm feeling X, but you don't necessarily have a label for it. And the thing is to give it a name. Once you can label it, the brain goes, ah, it's this. I am feeling, mad. Am I mad? But is it furious? Is it jealousy? Is it provoked? Or is it hostile? And the more you can then label your feelings, the more your brain will be able to go, oh, I know what that is now, and therefore I can begin to manage it. If you cannot label it, you cannot tame it. And the brain, and this is back to the amygdala, will go and search and go, oh, I have this feeling. I don't know what it is. I don't have a label for it. Therefore, I'm going to go back in my memory and go, when was the last time I felt this and what was happening? It's an alert, being alert to a threat. So you have to be very careful that if you don't label it, your brain is going to go searching through the amygdala, which memorizes all of the nasty thing that's happened in your life. And what may happen if you're not careful is that you go back to being when you were very young and unresourceful. You didn't have the resources because you were very young, but you had those feelings. And then what you can find is that your brain will throw you into those feelings. You'll be in an unresourceful state and you won't be able to cope with the situation very well. You won't be able to use your prefrontal cortex to understand, memorize what to do, and inhibit any other feelings that you might have. So it's really important. Catch it, name it, and tame it. And practice with friends, with family, to be able to label the words and the feelings, because the more you can actually label your feelings, the more your brain will be able to manage and regulate those emotions. And that's part of emotional intelligence, actually. So we've got a little bit more that I want to do, and I'm just aware that we've got 15 minutes left. So, but any questions so far? Because we're covering a lot of material at quite a speed. Fight or flight. Okay. Very quickly, fight or flight is like the amygdala hijack that I mentioned before, right? It's where our brain goes into, I need to escape from this situation. It's a threat response. Something bad is going to happen. And it's part of our brain that was developed in the early years of humans, right? And we share it with animals. And it basically means that we go into a reaction. And that means that we get a lot of blood goes away from our skin. So in case we get a cut, we don't bleed so much. It goes away from our tummies because we're not going to be thinking about digesting food if we're running away from a big wild animal, or we're going to have to fight a big wild animal. So it can disturb our digestion. It can disturb our blood flow. It also thickens our blood slightly because that means that, again, if we have a laceration, if we get cut, the blood will clot more quickly. And it also means that we tense up all our muscles. We breathe faster, our heartbeat goes faster. Now, all of those things together are really good if you're going to use up loads of energy. But if you don't use up loads of energy because you're actually sitting there worrying about your exams, or you're sitting there worrying about the pandemic, and you're not actually actively exercising, all of those things can combine and really cause a lot of physical disturbance in your body. So you can get stomach problems, digestion problems, or you can get blood problems, heart problems, and all those sorts of things, tension in your back and those sorts of things. So the fight or flight response, the best way to overcome if you're getting too much adrenaline in your body is to do lots of exercise, strenuous exercise, a brisk walk or even a run, or do some yoga or whatever it is that works for you to be able to do exercise that uses up that energy, and that helps alleviate it. However, to stop overthinking, control our emotions and thoughts, so I'm just looking at some of the questions here. Some stigma emerge after some specific incident. Is true or false? Please explain. Yeah, I mean, sure, stigma will happen for certain things are very difficult to talk about. Again, it's all about the society. So again, you have to be careful about who you do speak to and know that you're speaking to someone who you can trust. If you cannot trust them, best maybe not to speak to them, and then again go to Baba Ki Pathshala and be able to say, look, I've got this and I'm a bit embarrassed about it, or there's a stigma around speaking about this, because they'll be trained how to listen to you more effectively. Autonomy of the brain. Okay, we don't have enough time to go into the autonomy of the brain. I'm sorry about that. What should you do after realizing we are feeling bad or helpless? Right. Well, it's about speaking to somebody. That's the key. The key is to be able to label your feelings and say, okay, I'm sad, I'm unhappy, I'm anxious, and then find someone to talk to. And again, all I say is all the time is back to, because I did have this conversation. I said, well, what happens if people need help? And the wonderful organizers from Baba Ki Pathshala have said, speak to us. That's what they're there for. However, stop. Yeah, overthinking can happen when we're overthinking and trying to control. And the best thing therefore is to feel back into being present and just for a moment feel your breath, right? Just feel into your feelings and feel the sensations in your body. How's your breath going in through your nose? How's it filling your lungs? And breathing out again. If you can do that, it's amazing how quickly you can actually begin to calm the body down, because the body begins to realize that it's safe. There's not an imminent attack. It's actually what you're thinking of and your fear of an imminent attack, but you can actually begin to help your body to be more relaxed. And again, practicing that when you're not stressed is better than trying to practice it when you're stressed. So it's not good learning to swim when you're drowning, but it is good to practice learning to swim in shallow water when it's calm, because then you'll learn the techniques. So again, I highly recommend meditation for people as a practice for that. There's a question there. What's the difference between feeling or emotions? How can we see jealousy as feeling or emotions? Would be able to understand the better labeling. Okay. So the thing about feelings is the feeling is the sensation in your body. And you know, there is a lot of talk about how emotions generate a lot of feeling, but the emotions are there as a way of helping us to understand our the things that we say within our minds that give us these emotions. So I haven't explained that particularly well, but I would say in the context of the question, it's best to explain emotions as the feelings that you have about something. But that's easier, because otherwise we can get into the whole debate about the difference between an emotion and a feeling. Think of them both as feelings.
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah, Narayan, I have some series of questions for you. Shall I ask them, which we get in the registration form?
Yeah, do that.
Okay, thank you. My first question is, corporate and government employees in any domain feel judged or discriminated after being diagnosed with psychological disorders. What actions could be taken to remove this stigma in professional setting?
Okay, sorry, you just have to repeat that because I was just going through a couple of slides. So say that again.
Okay. I'm asking, corporate and government employees in any domain feel judged or discriminated after being diagnosed with psychological disorder. What actions could be taken to remove the stigma in professional setting?
Okay, what can we do to remove the stigma in professional settings? A very important question. It's such a massive cultural issue, right? And it has to come from the leadership. So in most organizations, there'll be a leader, and that leader needs to be able to talk about this stuff to make it safe for everybody else. So, and you know, sadly, some organizations simply do not have that sort of leadership. If we look at America, for example, you know, there's currently a president there who's not very empathic when it comes to anything like this. But there are other organizations where they are now having policies and procedures to help protect people and to talk about it. But in the absence of that, it's very difficult. Then it's not maybe possible to talk about it. I'll be realistic, right? But that's when, again, you need to find someone who you can talk to. And again, Baba Ki Pathshala, you'll be probably able to say there are maybe other charities for people in the professional realm who can get help in that way.
Yes, thank you. My next question to you is, there's stigma attached to the counselors or mental health therapists that they are just talking with their clients in the session. So how to make others understand about this necessity of psychology professionals or specialists?
Just repeat the last bit. You spoke a little bit too quickly for me.
How to make others understand about this necessity of psychology professional or specialist? Because there are a lot of stigma attached to the counselors that they are just talking with their clients.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes. So it's true. And again, this is sort of this way where all you can do is help the people you know, help the people who you work with. Or if you want to find a platform like LinkedIn or other media platforms where you talk about this stuff, because it's only the more brave people who talk about it who can then begin to be able to say, it's normal. And that's the breakthrough that we had here in the UK in the last 5 or really 10 years, that it's now become more possible. Because, for example, when we were growing up and my father was ill, it wasn't talked about at all. So you're pioneers, you are pioneers in your own country to be able to be the ones who are brave enough to talk about this and to explain more about what it means. So I get it. It's tough. I get it. I get that. Someone there is just sitting in the chat as well. To be honest, no matter how positive you are, there are really times that are too toxic. People will affect your ego. Bashers can somehow hurt you. Without a doubt. I'm not trying to pretend that it's just about positive thinking, but it's about being able to speak with someone who is safe to speak with so that you can make some choices about maybe no longer being around that person. Because if there are people who are hurting you, then it's also your responsibility to remove yourself from that situation. I know that's sometimes difficult when it comes to work because it's your job, right? And you need pay to be able to protect your family. But you do need to be able to find people to speak to who will then help you be more resourceful to say, okay, what can I do to change this situation? Because without speaking to anybody, you're in your own head, and that's not helpful.
Okay, moving towards my next question. My next question is, we often see when we deal with people, we have in our minds various kind of stigma based on their gender, races, religion, caste. So how to remain neutral and empathetic while dealing with people?
Okay, so these are really complex cultural questions. And there are so many different biases and so many different challenges that you have within Indian society. I don't have the answers to them all. But I am going to say, whatever it is, that there are all these biases. It's about being aware so that they're labeled. And I say, okay, so who is it that I can speak to? And who is safe to speak to? And who is not safe to speak to? Who's it appropriate to share my vulnerability with? And who is it not appropriate to share with? Because there's no point in you sharing with someone and then they take advantage of that or use that in a discriminatory way. That's not going to be useful. So again, back to the organization. I keep mentioning them again and again because this is one of the things I said, I'm not going to do a talk unless I can point people in the right direction for support, right? So, Baba Ki Pathshala are there to support you and to have these deeper, more complex conversations with you.
Yeah. Okay. There are 2 more questions I'm asking to you. How long does it take to change a behavior of a person? And how to remain consistent throughout the process without getting failed?
Without getting?
Failed.
Okay. So sorry, you just have to, it's just because the line, it broke up a little bit. So could you just repeat the question?
Okay. How long does it take to change a behavior of person and how to remain consistent throughout the process without getting failed?
Okay. Again, that's a long question. So a long answer. So I've given you a bit of an overview, and that's the professional nature of the more sort of specialist work, right? So one of the things I should have mentioned at the beginning, I'm not a mental health professional, right? I didn't do any studies specifically to deal with mental health. I talk about mental well-being in the workplace in order to avoid mental health issues. And how long does behavior change take? It's everyone's different, right? There is no answer. In England, we have this saying like, how long is a piece of string? Well, it could be very long or it could be very short. It's really difficult. Because it's one of those things that, depending on how deep the situation is and how personal or traumatic the situation was, can all have a huge impact on that. So generally speaking, you need to speak to a professional, and then that professional may be able to help. Now, there's also another thing to be aware of, is that there's lots of different types of therapies and different types and styles of support that are available. Some are quicker than others. So it's best to do some research, and again, talk to the people at Baba Ki Pathshala to be able to say, okay, what sort of support do I need? Because behavioral change can be quite quick, but that has a lot to do with the type of therapist. And I'll tell you a story about that, actually, which is very relevant. My father was ill. He went into hospital. He had treatment. But then he came out, and actually 6 months later, he went back in again because he wasn't really well. And then he had a different therapist, and that other therapist really helped him to see things in a very different way. So, the first therapist wasn't really able to help him properly. We thought he was better. He thought he was better, but he wasn't really. And that then had a relapse. So again, that's a good example of saying that, you need to find the right person. This is very sensitive stuff, and you need to believe in and trust the person you're speaking with in order to get the help. I hope that answers the question.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, good morning, good evening, sir. We are waiting for the next speaker now.
Yeah, okay, so we've got to go.
Yeah, it's time already.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
And what we'll do is we'll send out to everybody.
Hello, David. Very thank you for your wonderful presentation today. It's always been delightful for me to hear you, as I have already been through your some sessions, and it's always been delightful to hear you. You managed to deliver the topic in a very upbeat manner. We are feeling informed and very energized now. Thank you so much.
Okay, and then just as we leave, and I know we got the next speaker coming up, but any words of how you're feeling now? Just we started off with some words. Any words of how you're feeling now? It's always nice to ask that question, but I know that we're running out of time. But any questions? Any words that you'd like to say about how you're feeling? But we have to go. We have to go because I know you're very tight on time and you've got quite a busy schedule. Elated. I love to see that. Thank you. And energetic. Great. Thanks for this beautiful words. Great. Thanks to everyone. Okay, well, with that, I will say goodbye to everyone, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again. Thank you. Bye-bye.